Hi friends! Welcome to my channel. For those of you that are new here, my name is Katelyn and I like to film eyeshadow palette, ranking, and review videos, as well as the occasional other content sprinkled in. So if you like indie makeup, if you like eyeshadow palettes, if you like me, I highly recommend that you hit that subscribe button because I post 2 videos every single week. And for those of you that are not new here, my face is happy that you are seeing it again. I'm excited for today's video because I don't know if it was, I think it was over a year ago now, but I did a video where I said, if I had to declutter one palette from each brand that I have multiple palettes of from my collection, which palettes would I declutter? And I did that, and then I did like if I could only keep one palette. Anyways, today we are doing an updated version of the if I had to declutter one palette from a brand. And I had this on my list of like videos to do when I had time, and then I saw that Heather Austin did it, and that made me go, you know what? Let's do it. Let's prioritize this one. So here we are. Okay, so these aren't necessarily the brands in alphabetical order. I might be close. I have them pretty much organized in alphabetical order, but I sort of just like pulled them into the stack and stacked them how they stack nicely. And then I had 2 piles, like the first half of the alphabet, the second half of the alphabet. So they're relatively stacked alphabetically. So close-ish, but if we're slightly off, that's just because of how they were stacked. So anyways, starting with Ace Beaute Tropical Vibes. I only have 2 Ace Beaute palettes currently, and it's Tropical Vibes and Paledopoly, and you all know, or you don't, but I love Paledopoly. That's my favorite palette. So for this palette, I had to get rid of it only because Paledopoly is one of my favorite palettes of like all time. But I really like this palette, and I need to play with this palette more. It has such an interesting green color story to it. Anyways, that is that one. Next up for Adept, we have the Plain Jane Remastered palette. It is missing a shade because it's in my Twilight Build Your Own palette, and that honestly ends up being a little bit of a theme. I'm not gonna lie to you. There's quite a few of the palettes that are missing shades that are being used for that Twilight Build Your Own palette, and I didn't feel like taking them out just to put them back in. So anyways, here we go. But this is the palette that I would get rid of. I think the shade I'm missing is like a bluish shade. Anyways, I just felt like I have these shimmers in other palettes, whereas the other Adept palettes have more unique shades that I wouldn't be willing to get rid of, or an overall color story that I wouldn't be willing to part ways with. So if I had to pick one, it'd be this one. Neither of these palettes I have any intention of decluttering anytime soon. I actually really like them. Same with quite a few of these. I'll let you know if we come across one that I'm like, yeah, I'd probably declutter that one. I can let you know, but I don't think most of these I just decluttered and they all made it. So anywho, next up we have the BellaBeauteBar Star-Crossed Lovers palette, and it's ironic because I was going to declutter Poison Garden 2. I think I even put that on the declutter. Like if you watched my declutter video, I think that one was in the declutter basket, but I panicked and I brought it back. I couldn't do it. So then when it came time to do this, I was like, yeah, no, I really don't want to declutter that one. So I'm going with Star-Crossed Lovers only because this is a more monochromatic color story, or closer to a monochromatic. You obviously have red, pink, and purple, so it's not quite monochromatic, but compared to their other palettes, I like those other color stories like a little bit more. But I really like this palette, so I don't think I'd declutter it, but I guess I could have done the Land and Sea one, but I don't know. I really like the shimmers in that one too, so that was a tough one. This one was almost impossible for me to pick. Like, I could not pick. This is the Blend Bunny Cosmetics pick, but I went with All Done Up, but honestly, I didn't like that. Initially, I looked at All Done Up and was like, no, I've grown to love that palette. That can't be it. But then I opened every other one of my Blend Bunny palettes and was like, well, it can't be this one. Can't be this one. Can't be this one. Can't be this one. So anyways, I circled back to this one. I would definitely miss this because I do really enjoy this palette. I just finally landed on this one because I felt like I have a lot of these shades in other palettes. So could I dupe the vibes of this one the easiest? That felt like a yes for me. Danessa Myricks, we have Lightwork Volume 3. I've talked a lot about the issues I have with like the cream shades in this palette, that formula, and my eyes just doesn't get along that great. So I love all of my other Danessa palettes quite a bit. So this one kind of, because there's some shades that I have issues with, it won by default. But there's some really gorgeous shades in here. And so I would definitely miss it, especially because you can't buy it anymore. But that would be the one that would have to go. Next up, we have Esum Cosmetics. And I picked the number 4 Elevate palette, which is the Colorful Shimmer palette. I just like the other two better. That's really all it boils down to. I think the quality on this palette is nice. I don't think the quality is any different than the other two. I just prefer the formulas, or I guess I prefer the color story in their formula in the color story of the other two more. So anyways, that would be the one that would go for me. Then we have Ensley Rain Harvest Moon. This would bum me out really hard because I have all 4 of their like moon palette series, and so I'd be really sad to get rid of one of them, but I cannot get rid of Midwinter Dream, their collab with Brittany Huffman, and that's my only other palette from them that's not part of this moon series. So that's where we landed. But this is just not my favorite color story. This is also in my Twilight build your own palette, but this is just not my favorite color story. So while I would miss it for the purposes of like wanting to keep the band together, you know, with all of my moon palettes, I think I would also be okay if I didn't have this one. I also love the concept of this video where it's like, in what world do I have to get rid of one palette from each brand? I guess if you were trying to like move or something and you were trying to force yourself to narrow down your collection. But then if you were doing that, if you really didn't want to get rid of something, you could just be like, no, I'm not doing it. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. Anywho, next up we have the Scooby-Doo and Glamlite palette. And this one, it makes me really sad. But I was not willing to declutter the Rick and Morty palette, even though I haven't used it yet. I wasn't willing to do it because the color story looks amazing and I'm super excited to play with that one. So I couldn't pick that one. And then the Barbie one is one of my favorites. And then I feel like the Friday the 13th one has like a uniqueness in the tones to it that I'm also not willing to part ways with. So process of elimination, we landed here. But I love Scooby-Doo, and I do really like this palette. This is actually one of the palettes I have on my eyes today. I also have the Friday the 13th palette with it. But yeah, I really like this one. I think it's a fun color story. I think it's fun for Scooby-Doo, you know? So yeah, I feel sad about it. But if I had to pick one, that would be the one I would pick. Next up for Gourmand Girls, I would get rid of Nightshade. I only have 3 palettes from them. I have Haunted, Nightshade, and Silent Night. And I like Haunted and Silent Night better, so this one has to go by default. But I do really like this palette. I saw somebody do a look, like a yellow look with this palette the other day, and oh my gosh, it was stunning. It was really beautiful. So I kind of want to do that at some point. But I think this palette is gorgeous. It's just, again, if I had to pick one, that would be the one that would have to go. Okay, so next up we have Huda Beauty, and I'm so devastated. I somehow scratched the packaging on this, and it's all messed up, and that makes me sad. But anyways, if I had to get rid of one palette, it would be this Empowered palette. I just don't like this color story as much as I like the other color stories in the palettes I have from Huda. The mattes all pull very orange on me, even the ones that look like they should be more neutral or cool tone. They just have like an orangey hue, which, contrary to what my current eye look suggests, is not actually my favorite, although I really do like how this eye look turned out. I think it's fun. But anyways, for my neutrals, I usually like a little bit more on the cool tone side versus the warm tone side. So yeah, I think this is the one I'd get rid of. It was between this one and Pretty Grunge because I love Naughty Nude, Mercury Retrograde, and Rose Quartz. Like, I love those 3. So I was between this one and Pretty Grunge, but I felt like Pretty Grunge, I like the cool tone color story of that a little bit more. Empowered would be the one that would have to go. Next up, we have Kaleidos. So I picked the Flower Punk palette. I only have this palette and Club Nebula left in my collection. I've decluttered everything else. So, you know, yeah. Times are rough out here for Kaleidos. Also, I was curious, is anybody else's Sun Glazer shade like just like slowly like exploding out of the pan? Mine's like so puffed up and about to like explode everywhere. Everybody complained about the Melt Smoke Sessions palette doing that. So just curious if anybody's also noticed this or if that just happens to be me. I haven't had that issue with my Smoke Sessions palette yet, by the way, but have been on this palette. Anyways, I get rid of this one. I don't know why I haven't decluttered this one yet, but there's like something holding me back. Like I really want to keep this color story, but I don't know. I think it might be that I just really like the packaging. I'm not sure. If I don't use this palette this year, it actually will be decluttered, but we'll see what happens. I did really enjoy this when I first got it, and for a while afterwards, I felt like I reached for it a lot. But between this one and Club Nebula, I feel like I like Club Nebula more, and that feels like more of a piece of makeup history that I'm not willing to part with yet. Next up, we have Lethal Cosmetics. My Lethal Cosmetics palette that I'm going to show is not actually in its packaging, so ignore the packaging, but this is the Night Flower palette. I put it in this Death and Candy custom creation palette. Really, I ordered this palette for something else, but I didn't pay attention to the pan sizes, so they're a little big, but the Lethal shades fit in here nicely. I love and adore this palette, but it was either this one or Wildflower or the two Teresa is Dead palettes. The Teresa is Dead palettes are off the table. I'm not going to get rid of one of those two. They're a set, you know, like a salt and pepper shaker. Those have to stay together. So it was either this one or Wildflower, and then to me, this one and Wildflower felt like a set too, but I guess I had to pick one, and I went with this one just because I feel like I like the green shimmery shade in Wildflower, and I got rid of another palette that has a similar green shimmery shade. I'm like, I gotta keep at least one of these, so you'll see which palette I'm talking about in a second, but anyways, that's where we landed there. Next up, we have Lunar Beauty. This palette is also not in its packaging, but this is the Lunar Beauty 12 Days of Lunar palette. This was their advent calendar palette. I don't know. I just picked one, honestly, because I can't get rid of Life's a Drag, can't get rid of the 2 moon spells, can't get rid of which ones? Oh, Nude Prism, can't get rid of that, can't get rid of Fool's Fantasy, can't get rid of Siren Sunset. Oh, I'm such an idiot. Okay, hold on. I'm changing my pick. I forgot. I have one that I would get rid of. Hold on. This one was hiding between Nude Prism and Eternal Eclipse, and I kind of forgot that this was not the Nude Prism palette. Okay, Strawberry Dream. If I had to pick one, it'd be Strawberry Dream. This is my least favorite of my Lunar Beauty palettes. I won't be getting rid of it because I'm like a low-key Lunar Beauty collector, but it's not my favorite of the color stories. I think he has way better color stories than this one. It doesn't, there's still a hint of strawberry in the smell, so that part's nice, but no, I could part with that one. I won't, but I could. More so than I could the 12 Days of Lunar. I was really sad about that one. I was like, oh my gosh, I really like this palette. It's a really good neutral palette. Anywho, for Melt Cosmetics, this was another difficult one that just kind of random decision was made, but this is the Impulsive palette. I felt like I couldn't get rid of any of my 10 pan or 8 pans that are like the same size and shape, like they feel like a set, you know, like a dish set, since there's more than 2 of them, a dish set. So I couldn't get rid of any of those. And then Amor y Mariposas is one of my favorite palettes from them. Couldn't get rid of the 2 Beetlejuice ones. So yeah, this one was left over by default, but this is what the inside of the palette looks like. It's also not available anymore, so like realistically, it'd probably be fine if I got rid of it. I also don't reach for it a ton, but it is like fuels my soul in the sense of like, okay, I have almost every melt palette, at least the ones with the long rectangle pans. I have decluttered quite a few of the circle pans from them. But next up, Natasha Denona Retro Glam. This palette is missing 2 shades that are in my Twilight BYOP, but it's just not my favorite color story. It doesn't quite go deep enough for what I want in my palettes, so it's not quite a standalone palette for me. I don't find that I reach for it or am inspired by it a ton, so yeah, I feel like I like my other Natasha Denona palettes better, so if I had to pick one, this one would go. But as far as like actually getting rid of it, I'm not going to, because I love the ability to use the Natasha Denona palettes to do BYOPs or to mix and match pans like across her own like brand and like releases. So I would definitely keep it for that purpose. Next up is Nomad Cosmetics. I picked Paradise Islands. Just because I had to pick one. And this is probably the palette I reach for the least out of my Nomad palettes. This color story is like has a lot of like pastel-y mattes, which just is not my favorite, especially with the darker, not darker, but they're like bright shimmers that don't necessarily have a corresponding like darker matte, and I like more contrast in my eye looks normally. I did really like the looks I created with this palette, and I do really like this palette, especially when I combine it with the Monteverde Cloud Forest palette. I think they're a great combo. So no intention of actually decluttering it, but for the sake of this video, I had to pick one. Next up is the Odin's Eye and Angelica Nyqvist, and if you watched my declutter video and you know what happened in it stands out to you, you might be like, you did declutter that palette. You decluttered that palette, and you decluttered the collab palettes with, I think it was the ones that were with the Fancy Face, Judy, and Annette. Or no, I think Annette's was the only one I was going to keep. Yes. So it was like the Judy and the Fancy Face one, and then I think I was also going to get rid of one or two of the more recent collab. Anyways, I undecluttered all the Odin's Eye palettes. You all made me feel bad in the comments. You were like, what? And then I got DMs that were like, there's no way you would declutter the Hella palette because that's like a hot commodity item. So anyways, I undecluttered all of them. So now every palette I have from Odin's Eye is a part of either a collaborator set or the Christmas set. This is the only one that I don't have the partners of. I don't have her other like palettes that are in this shape that have, you know, the different color stories. So to avoid breaking up any of my sets, I had to go with this one. But I almost decluttered it and then undecluttered it because I panicked. So would I actually declutter it? I don't know. Clear, most recent evidence would suggest no. I wouldn't. I'd pull it back in. Anyways, next up for Shroud Cosmetics, we have the Peaches and Dreams palette. This is, again, a pick only because I didn't want to break up my It's Freakin' Bats and Halloween palettes. And I'm sorry if, like, that continuing to be a reason is annoying, but that's the way I made my decisions. So this is the palette where I was saying this has a really gorgeous green shimmer, and that's why I had to keep the other palette with the gorgeous green shimmer, so that because I was going to lose this one, so I was like, what am I going to do? But anyways, I really like the shimmers in this palette. I will say, of my 3 Shroud palettes, this one probably is my least favorite overall color story wise, because I don't really know what to do with these mattes. But beyond like 2 shadow looks or monochromatic looks, I'm like, I don't know what to do. So I kind of struggle with this color story. So even if the other 2 weren't a set, I think I would still pick that one. Next up, we have Simply Posh Cosmetics, and I'm going to get rid of, if I had to, the Berry Icy palette. This palette is super pretty. It's very blue heavy. I'm not a blue eyeshadow lover, and they have blues in their formula in some of the other palettes that I like and don't think I think I could be okay if I got rid of both of these. But like the other palettes, I don't think I would be okay if I had to get rid of those from Simply Posh. Again, no intention of decluttering this one. I really like this palette. Even though I don't like blues, I like the blues in that palette. But if I had to pick one. Next up, we have the Trixie Cosmetics and Juno Birch palette. I have this palette and the Horse Girl palette. I have not used the Horse Girl palette at all yet. I have used this palette a few times. I like this palette, but it's pretty much all matte, and it's colors that I have in other palettes. So if I had to pick, I'd get rid of this one. And I have heard really great things about the Horse Girl one, so I just would not be ready to part ways with that one yet. Next up, we have the Unearthly Cosmetics Spaced Out palette. So I decided that I couldn't get rid of any of my Halloween Unearthly palettes. I couldn't get rid of any of my 12 pan Unearthly palettes because I'm like sort of starting to collect those, especially if I ever get Don't Be Jelly. So that left One Lone Soldier, which was this one. And I also don't tend to love smaller color stories, so I felt like I probably would want to get rid of this one anyway. I do think it's really pretty, and I love the shades in here, but yeah, if I had to pick one, I think I'd have to go with this one. Okay, last up is Viseart, and I am gonna get rid of, if I had to, the Praline Épice Petit Four, just because it's a neutral, basic. I have this color story in Viseart's formula and other formulas a few times, so I just felt like this would be the one that I would miss the least, especially because I don't love a quad. I do like this. It's one of my newer ones in my collection, but I just feel like I already have it in the rest of my Viseart shades, so I think I'd be okay if that's the one that I picked. But anyways, those are all of the palettes. If I had to declutter one palette from each brand in my collection, those are all the palettes that we would get rid of. And yeah, let me know what you think of those choices in the comments. I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of flack for that hella pick again, but I promise you, I'm not actually decluttering it. It's staying. I undecluttered all of those eye palettes. For those of you that were worried about me, they're all back. And I'm going to see how much I use them this year. And I hope you all enjoyed it, and I will see you all next time. Bye.